But part of why I just now threw all that math of measuring the letters is because the letters need to be evenly spaced. And the way I do it is I look at the area and I basically see it to be a certain length. And if you see the length, there is just a set amount of letters. And part of the problem, this is where you really start to hone in your lettering skills, is that when you look at it, letters like A are a little bit wider. Letters like I almost have no width, usually. So where you start to get quite a bit better at lettering is where you start to practice. And I know I just said they're all 5/32, and there was a lot of math just quickly. But what happens is that basically you look at an area, and in this case I said it's about 3.5 inches. Well, 3.5 inches, there are 20 letters in 3.5 inches. So 20 letters have to fit into 3.5 inches. And basically 20 letters in 3.5 inches means each letter is basically 1/8 of an inch. And obviously, as I just said, the I is not going to be quite 1/8 of an inch. The A will be a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. And all the rest will be, and basically, as I said, the spaces are basically going to be more than 1/8 of an inch. They're almost going to be 1/4 of an inch, because that's just the way that the lettering lays on the engine. So then what's important to do is you really need to start looking at the engine. Like, there's a characteristic to each letter. Like, the back of the letters have thickness to them, and the front is narrow. Like on the R, it has a big tall top and a narrow bottom. And this is where you start to get good at lettering a little bit too, is that big space. If you find that your lettering's a little too big or a little too small, use that space between the words to fudge a little. You might think everything has to be absolutely perfect, and the problem is it's really hard to see me lettering because of all those doors. And don't try to letter as fast as I'm lettering here. I just have to do it to keep the video kind of moving along. But as I lettered here, part of what happens is that I measured for it to end maybe about here, but the A ended up being a little bit wider. And because there's that much space, there's a lot of space in between the words, you can kind of fudge into the extra space. And then you can use the word east, start it right where it is. And you start writing the word east. And if the T's a little too big or a little too small, look at the next space and then look at how big the space is between Florida and east, and make the space between east and coast be the same size. So, because your eye will catch how big this space is and how big that space is. So make it all to be uniform, because again, as I said, it'll give it that machined type look. The number underneath the cab. And the most important part, I would say, besides just making the number look refined and accurate, one very important part of putting the number underneath the cab is that if the paint scheme calls for it, you want to have the number be centered under the cab, which 9 out of 10 paint schemes do call for the number to be centered under the cab. So let's just make this be engine number, since they're in the 800 series. Let's just have it be number 80. Now, I'm going to give you a little challenge. Let's just do this as a challenge. Let's have it be 808. And one thing that's a little bit of a challenge in numbers, and it happens in the lettering too, is that if you have two of the same number, one thing that especially in numbers that your mind and eye catches is that if there are two of the same number, it's important to try to make both numbers be as close to each other as you can, because your eye will catch if one's wider or taller or narrower. Your eye catches that really pretty quickly. And so try to kind of refine both 8s so that they stand out, because again, that gives it the machined look. But as you start to look at it, you go, well, a human definitely did it. And as you look at it, this is very well centered underneath both of the side windows, so that's pretty good. Now we're going to do the Florida East Coast palm tree and sun logo. And this is something where just hours and hours and years of practice. So this is actually something where really all I recommend to you is just gesture into this. Look at the logo. I almost recommend to you, even compared to if you're looking at a photo, I recommend to you try to like call up like on Google or somewhere like that. Well, you probably might be looking at the engine anyways on Google or anywhere. But try to actually call up the logo itself so that you can actually see the logo, because that way you can look at the actual detail of, and sometimes somebody will have taken a photo of the logo where they've actually really gotten a nice close-up, and you won't have to do that. But it's very helpful. And if you can't, believe me, do you know how long it took before I could even begin to get anywhere close to all that I'm really being able to do here is just put little hints of the letters here and little hints of the palm tree. So the more you can put hints of the palm tree and hints of the sun and hints of the sea, it just makes it so that it looks like that there's the Florida East Coast logo there. And that's just all you really are trying to do. And then just put the number in the number board. And again, this is another area where just kind of try to give a hint of it. And there's the 808, and if you can make the 2 8s look similar, that's great. And then that's basically the lettering of the Florida East Coast. Now, the first color I'm going to paint is going to be the yellow. And the first step of painting the yellow is to trim along the basic white, sort of silver paint break. And the reason why you do this trim along it, these pins are very rough sometimes, is that you want to keep a nice tight edge A lot like with any kind of painting, most of the time spent painting is keeping the edge nice and sharp. Filling it in, really, the biggest part of filling in, there are two parts of filling in the paint, is you want to keep your edges nice and sharp, and in the end you want to keep your paint very smooth. Now, these pens, here's a color called Spanish Orange. These are Prismacolor pens. And see, very slowly I start in the beginning along where it starts, along the bottom edge. And I keep very tight against that white line. You in the beginning you don't even see that the white line's there. But see, all of a sudden, this train that really just looked like it was just a bunch of lines, the second you put any color on it, all of a sudden your mind just starts to say, wow, this looks like the Florida East Coast engine. Even the second you get any color on it. And there's a tendency you kind of get a little bit excited because it's like, wow, this already looks like the Florida East Coast engine. And one of the biggest things that people say, which I should have told you this maybe in the beginning, but even I kind of forgot, is a lot of people say, how do I color my drawings? And is that this is hot press illustration board. And I'll put a second coat on this. Because a second coat, what a second coat of color does is that there are areas where it's not even in places, and the second coat basically makes it so that rough edges all kind of even out. And hot press illustration board basically takes these pens so that you can color your drawings, because pens are a very smooth, nice way to color.